problem where you can join on Facebook Live. Shubham, can we start now?
Just a second, sir.
Okay. So we have shared the FB link also on chat. If anybody faces problem or any of your colleagues faces problem, can join there at Facebook Live also.
Should we start?
Yes. So, dear participants, good afternoon. I'm Shubham, and on behalf of Vipta Electrosort Private Limited, I would like to welcome you all for the 5th day of the Viptal Vigyan webinar, pardon, 4th day, and the case studies on the important topic. Viptal has the best range of compliance software services from GST, invoicing, TDS, tax, XBRL to other professional products like Virtual Office, WebEdge. We have a satisfied customer base of over 40,000 professional and big corporates. Before we begin with the webinar, I would like to request all the participants to switch off their videos and kindly post their queries in the chat box, which will be answered at the end of the session. Just in case if you have any query, you can just answer. Also, if you're facing any issue with the audio because of your internet connection, you can join our live streaming at Facebook. I've shared the link in the chat box, so you can join it there. So I would like to introduce here Rajiv Khandelwaji, Director of Viptal, to say a few words and introduce the speaker to begin with. He's the moderator of the day. Along with that, we have CA Pitam Goyalji from Tatvam Advisors. He is also one of the moderators today. So welcome Pitamji and Rajiv sir. Over to you.
Okay. Very good morning to everybody. As you're aware, today's topic is concept of supply with various practical cases. Today's session will be taken by learned speaker Ishan Patkar, who is an advocate of Bombay High Court. He's both a chartered accountant and an advocate. And he has more than 7 years experience in indirect and direct taxes. He has published 20 books on taxation. He's a member of various committees, etc., of Bombay Chartered Accountant Society, managing committee member, Good and Service Tax Practitioners Association of Maharashtra, All India Federation of Tax Practitioners Western Zone. He's also founder secretary of Confederation of GST Professionals and Industry. And a knowledge partner for today's webinar is CGPI. This association aims to be a platform of leading knowledgeable GST professionals in each state, city, and local area to bring all these leaders of the community on a single platform. So with these words, I'd request the speaker for the day, Ishan, to begin his deliberations. Welcome, Ishan.
Okay, just 1 minute. Huh?
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me and can you see me?
Yeah, you're audible. आपका video भी दिख रहा है.
Yeah, I just.
You can share the screen also.
Yes, just 1 minute. It's the first time I'm doing it, so just 1 minute.
It's okay.
Okay, can you see the screen?
Yeah, we are seeing the screen, right?
Yes, yes.
So today's topic is the concept of supply. Now, the word supply, of course, has not been defined anywhere. You have this entire GST flowing from the 101st Constitution Amendment Act, when the earlier sales tax regime, earlier service tax regime, and excise regime were all subsumed into something new called GST. Sales tax and all continue for some limited purposes with respect to 5 products. The 101st Amendment Act introduced the constitutional power to levy GST. Now, let us not go too deep into the constitution, but for the purposes of today's session, there is the basic question that we have to first answer is, what is a supply? You have a definition of supply in the CGST Act, but is there a definition of supply within the constitution? Why do I emphasize on the constitution? The reason is that if you see the act contains a lot of things which they have tried to put into the definition of supply. However, the constitution uses only in that article 246A, they say that a goods and services tax will be charged. And then if you go to article 366, which is in that a new definition has been inserted, which defines a goods and services tax as a tax on supply of goods and services. Now, as taxation lawyers, all of us know that today if we get up and argue anywhere in court that so and so is not a supply, as per the act, it is not covered within the act. The next day there will be an amendment and they will bring a deeming fiction retrospectively trying to cover that particular transaction. The only way out of this, therefore, is to understand what are the constitutional restrictions on the concept of supply. According to me, there is a prevailing myth rather nowadays that the word supply is so wide that everything can be taxed under it, and therefore the minute any transaction comes before a revenue officer, he just has to say that this is a supply, pay this much tax subject to whatever is the valuation, and you are done with it. That is not the correct approach. The first question that you have to ask is whether this is a supply as per the act or as per the constitution. If it is not a supply, then it cannot be taxed. If it is not covered by the act, of course you will win at the lower level itself. But tomorrow if there is an amendment, then you have to go one step further and see whether this particular supply is also covered by the constitution or not, or if it is not covered, then you'll have to challenge it. Now in the constitution, you have, as I said, in this article 366, you have this definition: goods and services tax is any tax on the supply of goods and services. Now, what is the meaning of supply? And as I said, why is it relevant? It is relevant because the act is subject to the constitution, and the act goes beyond that definition, whatever is written in the constitution, then you have a right to challenge it. Of course, the word supply itself has not been defined anywhere in the constitution. So what do you do? What do you do when there is no definition at all in the constitution itself? In 1935, when sales tax came, At that time, we didn't have the Constitution of India. We had the Government of India Act 1935. And you had this, just like we have today, this union list, state list, and concurrent list. You had the federal list, you had the provincial list, and I'm not sure there was no concurrent list at that time. The entry 54, or at that time the number was different. There was an entry in the provincial list which said tax on sale or purchase of goods. And right from 1935 onwards, that is after the end of Second World War, sales tax itself, indirect taxes became famous only after the end of Second World War. Once the Second World War ended, all the state legislatures in India started amending their sales tax acts and started saying that a works contract is a sale, then your leasing transaction is a sale, hire purchase is a sale, etc., etc. All types of transactions, they put a deeming fiction and they called it a sale, and they started taxing it. When we came, by the time we come to 1950s, after the Constitution is enacted, there is a case called Gannon-Dunkerley which went up to the Supreme Court. In Gannon-Dunkerley, Supreme Court said that if there is a word which is not defined in the Constitution, that does not mean that anything and everything can be allowed as a deeming fiction. The word sale has a definite meaning in law. In common law, even before the Sale of Goods Act is merely a consolidating act, but the word sale was understood as having certain characteristics which are required in a transaction. Only then you can say the transaction is a sale. And therefore they said that the entry in the Constitution which says the tax on sale will only cover those transactions which are sale as per the common law, or as we have the Sale of Goods Act. Thereafter that is the Gannon-Dunkerley decision. If anyone wants the citation, it is 1958. 9 sales tax cases, page 353, the Supreme Court of India. It's one of the most famous decisions in sales tax. Then similarly in income tax, you had the similar question. In 52 of list 1 of the Constitution, it was tax on income. The question was whether the state government, whether the word income admits of those elements which are not income as per the ordinary meaning of the term. Then in Naveen Chandra Mafatlal, finally Supreme Court said no, only those things which are income as understood normally will fall within that entry. That Naveen Chandra Mafatlal is 1954, 26, Income Tax Reporter 758, Supreme Court. Therefore, when we come to the definition of supply, when we come to the word supply which is used in the Constitution, there being no definition of the word supply at all, the only thing which can be done is that you have to look at the ordinary meaning of the word supply. Now there is one twist. Parliament can go beyond the ordinary meaning generally, but the state legislature cannot. How do they do this? When after Naveen Chandra Mafatlal, when they said that entry 52 list 1 can only cover those incomes which are, those profits or gains which are income as per the ordinary natural meaning, that was a case of capital gains. The question was whether capital gains falls within the ordinary meaning of income. And then the Supreme Court went from dictionaries to case law all over the world and said that capital gains is also considered as one kind of gains. Then in Dhillon's case, which was a 7-judge bench, there was an amendment which was made in the Income Tax Act, and the question was whether this falls within that word income. So Supreme Court said this does not fall within the word income. However, Parliament has power to go beyond the union list. There is something called a residuary power of legislation, which is in Article 248, read with 97 of list 1. Anything which is not covered by the state list and or the concurrent list is still okay because Parliament has primacy in it. Anything which does not fall within the state list will automatically, and does not fall within the union list, will automatically fall within the residuary power of legislation, and a parliamentary enactment in fact cannot be challenged on the basis of legislative competence until and unless you show that what they have done is covered by the state list, because if it is not covered by any entries in the union list, they have the residuary power. Service tax came under the residuary power, which is entry 97 of list 1. The Dillon's case is 1971, two Supreme Court cases, page 779, that is 7-judge bench judgment. Thereafter, however, when we come to GST, now the question is, if the parliament or the state legislatures go beyond the ordinary meaning of supply, the ordinary concept of supply, we'll discuss what comes within the ordinary concept of supply. We'll just get done with this constitutional problem. If there is something which does not fall within the ordinary concept, for example, penalty, I am 100% sure the minute any high court says that penalty or liquidated damages is not a supply, is not consideration for a supply, second day an amendment is going to come saying penalty and liquidated damages is a supply. In fact, today also in the tariff there is a specific entry for liquidated damages, and we'll discuss during the course of today's session that whether tariff entries can influence the charging provision or not. The question will be then, when tomorrow when the court says that no, look, penalty is not consideration for supply, there is no supply happening, etc., etc. And tomorrow if a demon fiction is put in the GST Act, the question is, as far as state legislature is concerned, Dillon's case does not apply to the state legislature. State legislature has no residuary power. They have to strictly go as per whatever is there in the state list, or now as per 246A of the Constitution. 246A is the provision for charging GST. For GST, somehow these people have not put the power in the union list, state list or concurrent list. They created a completely new provision, which is 246A. State legislature has no residuary power, but parliament, whether it has residuary power to go on enacting fictions. As I said, tomorrow can they come out with a fiction specifically saying that penalty or liquidated damages is a supply? According to me, they cannot do so, because when the 101st Constitution Amendment Act was passed, the Article 248 itself has been amended to make it subject to Article 246A. Correct? And in the Select Committee report also, there is a specific, in the Select Committee report of the Rajya Sabha, when this question was raised about residuary power of legislation, there is a specific comment there where government itself has said that in GST, the residuary power of legislation is not available. Therefore, Dillon's case, according to me, should not apply at all in GST. In GST, if something is there which is not covered by the ordinary concept of supply as per dictionary meaning, etc., then it is outside the constitutional power to tax itself. Parliament at least cannot rely on that Dillon's case or on the residuary power, and the state legislature also can. State legislature anyways had no residuary power of legislation. Having said that, today there is a judgment of Supreme Court which says that residuary power can be used by the parliament even after GST came. That is Mohit Minerals. The citation is 2019, two Supreme Court cases, page 599. That was a case on which a cess which was imposed on supply of goods or services was challenged as being unconstitutional. Now the problem with Mohit Minerals is that though the council argued that Dillon's case cannot apply, because at the time when Dillon's case was argued, Article 248 was not amended. Today it stands amended. In the judgment itself, though they have cited Dillon again and saying that residuary power, parliament can do anything, can go beyond also 246A, that amendment which is made to Article 248 is not considered in Mohit Minerals, and therefore that question is still open. In fact, Mohit Minerals, the further problem is this, that first they say that a cess on Mohit Minerals, let me clarify, Mohit Minerals was not on the meaning of supply or concept of supply and whether deeming fiction can be added to bring within the taxing net things which are not ordinarily a supply. That was a slightly different question, whether a cess which is imposed on supply of goods or services falls within 246A or not. And they said that this is cess is also tax, etc. They say first that 240 that the power to impose cess comes within 246A itself. Having said that, I'm not sure why they had to fall on the residuary clause of legislation, because if it falls within 246A, there is no question of looking at whether they have the power under the residuary entry also. In any case, at that amendment which is made in Article 248 saying that subject to 246A, Parliament has residuary power of legislation. That amendment has not been noticed by the Supreme Court. There is no comment on that. Therefore, that question is open. Now, when I emphasize on this thing, ordinary meaning of supply, what is the ordinary meaning of supply? You have a definition of supply in the Act, which we'll do one thing, we'll go to the definition directly. I don't know what is happening here. The definition of supply is in section 7. Just hold on 1 minute. Okay, so section 7 is the definition of supply, which they call scope of supply. The question is this: what is really the, before we go to the statutory meaning, what is the ordinary meaning of supply? How do the dictionaries define it? How have the courts understood supply in its ordinary meaning? Dictionaries say a supply is the providing or furnishing of anything which the recipient either requires or which the recipient is in need of or he wants. There are two things: either he must require it or he must want it. Requirement and want is different. Now, the requirement and want has to be from the recipient side, not from the side of the supplier. In the 19th century, there were a lot of criminal statutes. I think they have survived even in this century. Lot of criminal statutes which made it a criminal offense to supply any drugs, etc. And the question which used to often arise is whether an offender is supplying the drugs or no. And in this case, R versus Maginnis, I'll give you the citation, 1 minute. The question was, A gave certain drugs to his friend B for safekeeping. Thereafter, B returned those drugs to A because they were only given for safekeeping. And the question was whether A supplied the drugs to B and B supplied the drugs to A. And the House of Lords came to a conclusion in this case that when A gave those drugs to B for safekeeping as a custodian, A is not making a supply to B. That is because B is merely acting as a custodian or as a safekeeper of the entire of the drugs. He has no control over the goods. He does not get any control over the goods. He does not get any discretion over how to use the goods. And the House of Lords said merely because physical possession passes does not mean that this becomes a supply. Along with the physical possession, some control or some discretion over the goods have to pass. The recipient should be either allowed or should be in the position to use those goods according to the way he wants. I mean, this good, forget that those drugs, even when you are putting your jewelry, etc. in a bank, are you supplying jewelry in a safe deposit, etc.? Are you supplying the jewelry to the bank? The bank cannot do anything with the goods. The bank has no real control over the goods. They have made some lien for charges, etc. They have no discretion over what they want to do with the jewelry, etc. So therefore, those kind of things where you're merely giving something for safekeeping, that cannot be a supply. And when he is returning back, of course, that also cannot be a supply. Then in R versus Dempsey, which is this R versus Magenis, is 1987 Appellate Committee, page 303, House of Lords, and R versus Dempsey is 1968 82 Criminal Appellate Reporter, page 291, Court of Appeal. R versus Dempsey, one of the examples which was given, which has become a classic example, was when I go to a restaurant, especially in these Western restaurants where you wear these cloaks and all in winter, there is someone called a cloakroom attendant who is waiting near the entrance of the restaurant. When he takes your cloak and he keeps it in safekeeping. He may take some tip also from you at the end of whenever you are leaving. The question which the Court of Appeal asked was, are you supplying the coat or the cloak to the cloakroom attendant? Then you are not. Though he is using it to provide his general services of safekeeping, etc., he has no discretion or control over the goods. Then all this line of judgments has been referred to by the Madhya Pradesh High Court also. And the question was, when I am posting any letter or if I am sending any courier, correct, is the postal service supplying the letters to the recipient? A courier service which merely transports the letter from one place to another, whether it is supplying the letter to some other, to the third party, etc., to the recipient. And they said, no, this cannot be. This is not ordinarily a supply. Now, all these examples, even today, if you apply them to our GST Act, you cannot say that a custodian is giving any service, that anyone who is giving goods to a custodian, there is any supply. You cannot say that a courier transport service is supplying the letter itself. It may be supplying some limited service of transportation, but the letter itself is not supplied. All these ways, there are otherwise also a lot of decisions because of this word supply was used in other acts also, supply of water, supply of electricity, etc., etc. A lot of decisions are there on whether it is a supply or not a supply. Discussing the ordinary meaning of supply, I will not go into all of them, but this is basically the ordinary meaning. This being the ordinary meaning, the question then arises is whether in section 7, which is scope of supply, they have either modified the ordinary meaning. Of course, Parliament can restrict the ordinary meaning. That is not a problem. Problem arises when Parliament expands the ordinary meaning. If today you say the Constitution only allows supplies which in its ordinary meaning are supplies, then Parliament or the state legislature in the GST Act can either adopt the entire ordinary meaning or they may restrict the ordinary meaning, so that, because once they restrict the ordinary meaning, the tax liability anyway reduces. But they expand and bring in fictions and try to treat as supply those things which are not supply, then there is a problem. There are a couple of instances where the current definition, in fact, if you see Schedule 1 and 2, there are instances where the definition, the Schedule 1 and 2 goes beyond the ordinary meaning. When we come to Schedule 1 and 2, I will show you. Now let us see section 7, subsection 1. For the purposes of this Act, the expression supply includes 1A, all forms of supply of goods or services or both, such as sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease or disposal, made or agreed to be made for a consideration by a person in the course or furtherance of business. Now kindly see, as far as consideration is concerned, the requirement that there should be a consideration for a supply has merely restricted the ordinary meaning. Under the ordinary meaning, there is no requirement for consideration at all. Even a gift can be a supply. That case is John versus Matthews, where a gift was treated as a supply. John versus Matthews, 1972, Queen's Bench, page 443. But the policy of the act is that they have made consideration mandatory, and therefore the ordinary meaning is restricted. The reason is, if there is no consideration, it becomes very difficult to identify a transaction. There are only some 4 or 5 transactions which are taxable without consideration, which are there in the schedule 1. Only those transactions are taxable even if there is no consideration. But if generally the act implements a regime where even without consideration you have to pay a tax, then the problem will be, how do you define, how do you keep finding out whether there is a supply or not? Ultimately, that what Parliament and the state legislature want to levy is a commercial tax. It is not supposed to be a tax on personal transactions, etc. That is why they also say in the course of business, etc. Who has to ensure that there is a certain dividing line. Those which fall in the personal sphere without consideration, etc., they are not taxed. Those which are commercial transactions are taxed. Now, what is the meaning of these words, all forms of supply? I keep on hearing that when the definition says supply includes all forms of supply, yani sab kuch tax hoga. There is, everything is taxed. Kindly see, the definition is actually cyclical. It is not a definition. If you read the entire section 7, you don't exactly know what they want to treat as a supply. Then you have to, as I said, go back to the ordinary meaning. It merely says supply includes all forms of supply without actually explaining what a supply is. And therefore, the ordinary meaning is not ousted. Now, this clause, a supply includes all forms of supply in the course of etc. etc., is adopted from the New Zealand GST Act. And in New Zealand, their High Court has given 2 judgments saying that when the Act says supply includes all forms of supply, that means the ordinary meaning is still relevant. In fact, the High Court has, in a sense, criticized, saying that this definition does not really explain what is a supply, and therefore you have to fall back on the ordinary meaning of supply. Those 2 decisions are Data Bank Systems versus Commissioner of Inland Revenue, which is 1987, 9 New Zealand tax cases, page 6, High Court of New Zealand. Then Pacific Trawling versus Ministry of Fisheries, 2005, 22 New Zealand tax cases, page 9, High Court of New Zealand. Now, I understand I am shooting off a lot of citations. I am told that they are going to record this session. Those, I don't know, I had written a book for Bombay Chartered Accountants Society on the concept of supply. All these citations are there in the book. In fact, I'm taking instead of taking separate notes, I'm sitting with the book only, which I have only written on this concept of supply. I'm not sure whether Bombay Chartered Accountants Society is allowing any e-publication, etc. But after the lockdown, if you can contact them and get the book, all these citations are there in the book if you are not able to note down. Or if the recording is there, then you will be able to take it from the recording. Therefore, identical section in New Zealand, where we have borrowed this from, says that ordinary meaning is not ousted by simply saying supply includes all forms of supply. Then there are various cases within VAT and GST also. One of the cases which arose in European Union was when a person steals another person's goods, whether that is a supply. The European Court of Justice said that there can be no supply. If someone is stealing someone's goods, that really does not amount to a supply. That case was British American Tobacco versus Belgium, which is a judgment of the European Court of Justice dated 14th July 2015 in case number 435 of 435/03. Then another aspect which arose in the UK courts was, it is okay when you say that a thief who steals someone's goods, then there is no supply by the owner to the thief. But what happens when the thief makes a resale of those goods to someone else? And one of the arguments which was made by the council was that the thief has no ownership, it is not considered a sale, etc. But in this Oliver's case, the UK High Court turned down all those arguments, saying that in the ordinary meaning of the word supply, it is not necessary that you should have any kind of ownership in it. As long as you have some control over, physical control over the goods, and physical possession and control is passing, it is a supply. And therefore, when a thief makes a resale, that resale becomes a supply. This is Commissioner of Excise and Customs versus Oliver, 1981, All England Reporter, page 353, which is the Queen's Bench judgment. Then there are various other issues whether this amounts to a supply or does not amount. In Australia, for example, because our GST is limited only by on uh, on goods and services, and land, bare land is kept outside goods and services. The question in Australia, even land is covered in GST, and the question which used to arise is, if the government is compulsorily acquiring your land, whether that amounts to a supply by the owner of the land to the government. And the courts made a distinction saying that the word supply, rather the word make a supply, kindly see in your section 7(1)(a) also. It says supply made or agreed to be made. Now, agreement to supply will always require consent, offer, acceptance, etc. The question is making of a supply. The words make a supply, whether they require some positive, some consensual act by the supplier. And the Australian courts have held that it is necessary that there should be some consent by the owner to the transaction. If the act, if the government is appropriating private property under the garb by passing an appropriating act, basically just confiscating. You forget land acquisition. If customs tomorrow confiscates my goods, can it be said that I have supplied goods to the customs authority? That cannot be. There is no consent in it. It has happened without my consent. And those, I can't recollect the citation. That judgment deals at length with the meaning of the word make as well as the meaning of the word supply, saying that the word make means there must be some positive consensual act. One cannot make something when really he is simply tolerating and suffering what has been done by someone else. Now I understand the next question will be for those who are thinking about schedule 2, tolerating an act, etc. We'll come to it when we discuss schedule 2. Now, therefore, in India also, when private property or goods, etc., are compulsorily acquired, confiscated, forfeited, etc., there is, according to me, no supply at all. It does not fall within the ordinary meaning of supply. Then now the next point of discussion is supply. All supplies are not taxed. What is taxed is a supply of goods or services or both. I'm not sure why they added or both at the end of the day, because they have a definition for goods, then they have a definition for services. Services says anything other than goods. So basically by saying or both, maybe a composite transaction where there are both goods and services, they thought that it is better to clarify it. But otherwise the word or both does not seem to add any magic to this, this section 7(1)(a). Now, just see the definition of goods is in section 2, subsection 52. This definition in section 2, subsection 52 is taken, I think 99% it is inspired by sales tax definitions only. It is a definition borrowed from the Sale of Goods Act with some modifications. What does the definition say? Section 252, just 1 minute. Goods means every kind of movable property other than money and securities, but includes actionable claims, growing crops, grass, things attached to or forming part of the land which are agreed to be severed before supply or under a contract of supply. This has taken the entire definition from Sale of Goods Act, which was again taken from the which was again taken into the Sales Tax Act. So there is a lot of case law on whether something is goods or not. The only difference from Sale of Goods Act seems to be in Sale of Goods Act, an actionable claim is treated as goods, but here an actionable claim is not treated as goods. Sorry, an actionable claim is treated as goods in this case, and I think in Sales Tax Act it was not treated as goods. Now, kindly see, every kind of movable property, the first question that you have to ask yourself is whether a particular thing is property or not. You cannot assume that every transaction relates to a transaction involves a transfer of property. If there is a transfer of property involved, then the question arises whether it is movable property or immovable property. But if there is no property only, then it cannot fall within the definition of goods. There may be some people who will ask that what is the difference? Agar goods mein nahi aaya to services mein aayega. The difference is that for your time of supply, place of supply, etc., a lot of your consequences, legal consequences change. If you misclassify goods as services, then there are other consequences in place of supply, time of supply, where you can go wrong, and they can entail some kind of financial penalty, etc. Of course, everything which does not fall in goods may not automatically fall within services also. We'll have to see the definition of services for that. Now, what is property? Property has really in law, two things are considered property. Anything which has a value. Second, which is recognized by the general law as a form of property. Everything which is valuable is not property. There may be many things which have some value, but which are not considered by the courts as property. The second part of the definition of property, which is there in many leading books, that it must be recognized by the courts of law as property, deals with whether over a course of time certain things have acquired the recognition as property in your general law. That you have to look at the general law, the common law, and not to the GST Act to decide whether something is property or not. Something may not be property in common law, but by statute, some other statute, it may have been declared as property. For example, patents, etc., the Patent Act, the Copyright Act, etc., they specifically say that this is movable property, it can be assigned, etc., etc. Therefore, the question always is whether it is property or not, is you have to go to the general law, you have to see whether it is valuable and whether the general law treats it as a property. So there are some things, the practical consequence of this discussion I'll tell you. You may be thinking ki ye kya itna theoretical bata rahe. There was a case in England where a student went in for a university examination, correct? What he did was he did not take the exam paper with him. Before the examination or during the examination, during one of the times, he did not take the paper with him. He simply wrote down all the questions on another sheet of paper and took that sheet of paper away. The question which was there was whether this amounts to a theft of the examination questions. Kindly see, they could not charge him under theft of the question paper because he did not take the question paper. He took the questions without taking the paper at all. He wrote down the questions on some other paper. Some of it he may have memorized also, and he walked away, and then he sold it outside, etc. And the UK court said that because for the law, for the offense of theft, you require something to be personal property or goods before you can say that it is stolen. The question was whether this is property or not, firstly. And the UK court said that in law, information or knowledge has never been considered as property. Kindly note, information or knowledge has never been considered as property, and therefore merely taking information, stealing information does not amount to a stealing of property. At least the property right is not infringed. This case is Oxford versus Moss, which is 1979, 68 Criminal Appellate Reporter, page 183. And one more case is there, OBG Limited versus Allen, 2007 UK House of Lords, page UK House of Lords is UKHL, page 21. You will ask what is the practical application of this in GST. The practical application is there in your deciding whether it is goods or services. There was a similar case which took place, not a theft case, but in earlier sales tax, that Anandam Vishwanathan case. What had happened in that case was a contract was given by the university to to a printer to print the question papers. The question was whether the question paper, here the only question was not the intangible information, but whether the question paper itself was property or not. Correct? Question paper itself was property or not. The Supreme Court said, as far as the questions are concerned, those questions cannot be property and therefore they cannot be goods. But once they are put on a paper, then you can say that there is a property which is created. Then the further question was whether it is goods or no. That I will discuss when I come to the marketability criteria. They said that goods have to be marketable because a question paper is confidential information and it is not marketable, it cannot be goods. That is a separate part. Then in Bombay High Court, again the same question arose when I am giving to some contractor, for example, and therefore in Anandam Vishwanathan they concluded it is a works contract, it is not a sale of goods. In Bombay High Court, in Saraswati Printing Press, the question arose was, if I give to someone a contract to make visiting cards for me, the question was whether that person who is making the visiting cards and supplying me is making the sale of goods. And again, the Supreme Court said, the Bombay High Court following Anandam Vishwanathan, etc., said that the information which is there, the name, etc., that is not property. When it is put on the visiting card, that it may turn property at that time, but then this is not marketable because this, when I make a visiting card saying Ishan Patkar, that I cannot take to the market and I cannot sell it. It is not marketable, therefore it cannot be goods. And when you buy, for example, when you have your letterheads made with your name, etc., that cannot be goods. But when you buy general purpose letterheads, that can be goods. Okay. So basically, therefore, your intangible information or knowledge cannot be goods. That same thing, trade secrets, confidential information cannot be goods. That is again a High Court of Australia judgment in United Aircraft Corporation, 1943, 68 CLR 525, High Court of Australia. I understand those who may be doing sales tax, they may be thinking कि हमारे यहाँ पे वो बड़ा notification था, उसमें trade secret, confidential information, goodwill सब डाला था. This is goods करके. But apart from copyright, patents and trademarks, no other kind of intent and software to some extent, which I will explain, no other kind of intangible was actually tested in any court of law in sales tax. Therefore, even though sales tax authorities were notifying things like trade secret, etc., as goods, that does not mean that they are goods. Trade secrets is not even property as per common law, as per general law, or a confidential information. Therefore, property as in property which can be assigned, etc. Therefore, they cannot be goods which fall within the definition of goods. Then you had one case where there was a cricket match which was going on in Australia. Someone stood, they were not allowed into the grounds because there was some ban, etc. on that person. He was not allowed into the grounds to come and shoot that video match. So what that fellow did was, he took a flat somewhere in a tower which was just outside the perimeter of this the cricket ground, and from there he did video shooting, and then the match organizer sued this person for stealing their video, stealing their this one intangible property, etc. And the Australian court again said that this cannot be property at all, because news or you may have other forms of action. This is again Victoria Park Racing and Recreation versus Taylor, which is 1937, 58 CLR 579 High Court of Australia. All these things will help you in deciding whether something falls within goods or services. Simply because there is some kind of property which you think is there is some kind of right. There is now a great prevailing myth that we try to call everything a right and put it in the definition of goods. That is not right. We have to see whether that particular thing is property as per the common law or not. A living body now you have all these various institutes which are doing testing, etc. There are samples which are given of tissues and everything. The question is whether these parts of body, parts of a living body or parts of a dead body, or the living body as a whole or the dead body as a whole, whether that is property. In common law, in general law, you don't regard your living body or the dead body as property at all. And there are judgments over judgments saying that even after a man dies, if you take any organ, etc., that cannot be treated as goods. The reason is because in law, the human body is considered to be sacrosanct and therefore it is not considered property at all. Then electricity, this Madhya Pradesh State Electricity Board judgment 1973 Supreme Court said electricity is goods, but the further question which arose was, which has not been dealt with in India, electricity may be goods, but there are some electric signals which go through your fiber optic cable, etc. Whether they are goods. And the Australian court said the electric signals are so fleeting and so transient. For something to be goods, there must be something permanent. The electric signal, they said, can never be goods. Unlike electricity, they are fleeting signals. And electric signals and data signals, therefore, in ASX operations versus Pont Data Australia, the Federal Court of Australia said that electric signals are not goods. 1990 Federal Court Reporter, page 460. Then the famous question of software which was going on in India before GST. As I said, information is not goods. Information is not property. If you see the Tata Consultancy judgment of the Constitution Bench in 2004, 137 sales tax cases, page 620, Supreme Court. Tata Consultancy, the question was, there were two kinds of software which were considered by court. One is software which is already incorporated in a physical medium, your CD, etc. Then there is software which is not incorporated in a physical medium, okay, which may be downloaded, etc. Then there are certain, so even with respect to software which is incorporated in a physical medium, the physical medium, it may not be readily sellable, etc. What must be done was that some companies, some IT companies engaged to devise an IT solution for the client, exclusively for the client. They make the IT solution. In making that IT solution, they have to put it on CD and then install, etc. Whether this amount, the software itself is goods, or software which is put on a physical medium is goods. The Supreme Court went through all those English authorities and said software is nothing but a set of instructions, and the set of instructions is not considered as property in common law. Even if you see copyright which was given in software, copyright itself may be property. The right to claim claim the use of a software, etc., exclusively itself is property. But copyright does not mean that the software itself, the set of instructions themselves become property. Copyright is merely a negative right to keep other people away from those set of instructions. And therefore they said that merely instructions may not be property, but when you put it in a CD, then instructions incorporated in the CD which is tangible, that can be property. Now, the next question which was there was, there may be two kinds of CDs. One CD, as I said, which is given by a IT company, which is devising an customized software for its client. Then they may be putting it in a CD and they may be transferring it to the client's system, etc. Or there may be CDs with like your game CDs, etc., which are generally available in market off the shelf. Like they are actually available, they are mass produced, they are available, they are distributed. Tata Consultancy said, with respect to customized software, we will not decide anything. That question they have kept open. But with respect to those CDs which contain software which are produced in mass quantities and sold and distributed in mass quantities, that they said is goods. Customized software, again, there was a question of marketability, etc. But at least with respect to software which is put in the CD, they said it is property. And if it is generally available in the market, then it is marketable, then it is goods. Now, this is where the development in India at least has stopped at the Supreme Court level. After 2004, there is no Supreme Court judgment dealing with customized software, etc. Outside India, however, in UK, the further question whether when I am merely downloading a software, whether that download makes it goods or not has been considered in Computer Associates UK versus Software Incubator. This is 2018 EWCA, which is England and Wales Civil, which is CIV, page 518, and there the UK Court of Appeal said that it may be true that when you are putting a software in a tangible medium like CD, it becomes goods. But when you are downloading over the internet, there is no tangible medium. And the software itself, the nature of the software as a set of instructions, it is not goods. It is not there on any tangible medium. Therefore, a software download cannot be a download of goods, etc. Or cannot be a sale of goods, because that was a case which arose under the Sale of Goods Act. All these questions, of course, will start coming up. Now, again, on a practical level, why is this important for us? It is important for two reasons. If you are downloading software from outside India, okay, and the customs, because now importing of any goods or services, you have to pay IGST. If you are importing software, there will, of course, and there is no downloading software, there will be no physical medium. It cannot pass through the customs port. But then whether you treat it as goods or services for the purposes of IGST, correct? The consequences change whether it is goods or services. I understand ultimately it is taxable, but the consequences in law, if you misclassify it, then there is a problem. Then we are already at 1 o'clock. So as I said, with respect to goods, the further criteria, kindly see now in goods, the word marketable itself is not written, but the Supreme Court from day one has been saying in Sale of Goods Act or in your excise, everywhere they have said that marketability is required in the ordinary meaning of goods, and if something cannot be brought to the market and sold, it is not marketable, then that cannot be goods at all. And then that, of course, in sales tax, then they said this is service or this is works contract. The consequence in sales tax was to shift it out of goods and send it to services or works contract. Now, the leading judgment on this is Delhi Cloth and General Mills, which is 1977, 1 ELT, page 199. And even in general law, if you see, it's not something which is restricted only to customs, excise and sales tax. Even in general law, there are a lot. I won't now read out all the cases because we are running out of time. Even in general law, there are a lot of cases which say that unless it is marketable, it cannot be goods. Even in Sale of Goods Act, you have that. Therefore, there was another question which was posed, an advocate who was not this judgment is there. I'll just read out this citation because this is relevant. R.D. Saxena versus Balram Prasad Sharma. The advocate was not paid for his work. So the advocate said, I have a lien on the papers of the client. In Contract Act, you can have only lien on goods. And when it went to the High Court and to the Supreme Court, the court finally said that the papers of the client are not considered goods because they are not marketable. A client cannot go to the market and sell his papers. Therefore, you cannot have a lien under the Indian Contract Act. Then if you see the definition of goods, it says other than money and securities. Money is defined in the act itself to say any legal tender, and there are certain other checks, promissory notes, everything becomes money. And securities is securities as per the Securities Transaction Act. Now kindly see, shares are goods as per the Sale of Goods Act. Sale of Goods Act specifically covers shares. I don't know why they did that, but they did that. However, from the day one, and this was debated even in the Constituent Assembly, the policy of the law has been not to tax, not to include shares in the definition of goods, even in sales tax. The reason is because stamp duty is levied on, the reason was that the founders of the founding fathers did not want 28 different states levying sales tax on the security transactions. If there are interstate security transactions, then the development of the security market becomes very difficult. Therefore, as a matter of convention from day one, I don't think there is any constitutional restriction to taxing even shares under sales tax or even under GST. But as a matter of convention, right from 1950, we have been keeping securities outside sales tax, and even in GST, securities are outside GST. The corresponding definition of services also says other than money and goods. Now, why money? The reason is, in the case of a bar, if A is selling something to B and B is giving money to A, now money is considered property, movable property. If they don't specifically exclude money, then money will also become goods. Even in Sale of Goods Act, money is excluded from the definition of goods. The reason is, if you don't exclude money, then money is movable property, then money also becomes goods. And then when I am purchasing something, he gives me something, I give him money, then it becomes a barter instead of a sale. And they don't want all those things where, there is double taxation. I am giving him 100 rupees, again pay tax on that. He is giving me something whose value will be 100 rupees, again pay tax on that. Then you come to the definition of services. Services definition, if you see, services includes everything other than goods. Now the question again is, when it says service include, let us see the definition. It is at, I think, definition of services is on services is 2, subsection 102. Services means anything other than goods. See, again, money and services, securities are out, but anything other than goods. Now, one of the other great myths which is going around is services means anything other than goods, and goods mein nahi aaya to services mein aayega. That means everything is taxable. That is not the correct construction. First, it has to fall within the meaning of supply. Then the question is whether it is a service or not. If there is no supply only, then whether it falls within the definition of service, etc., is a different matter. The further question is whether the ordinary meaning of services is ousted by this definition. Similar definition is there in Australian GST, and the tribunal which is there, that has not been set aside in appeal till date, and it is considered a good law. People are following it. All the commentaries are at least citing it. The question was, there was a solicitor who had done some misconduct, and the solicitor, there was a penalty which was levied, and the GST people said, "Arey, to penalty levy kiya, service includes everything other than goods. Therefore, now this is a supply of service. by the bar council to the solicitor, for which the consideration is the penalty. And the judge who heard the matter, he severely criticized this stand. He said that Parliament never intended to completely to leave the ordinary meaning of service behind. Then he extracted all the definition of the dictionary meaning. He said service can only be something which benefits the recipient. Something which penalizes the recipient can never be service. And they said the parliament could not have intended something like this, something so absurd. They must have then written it somewhere. Then again, someone may ask this tolerating a supply, etc. That tolerating and a supply, etc. is there in ECJ also. It is there is the European VAT also, in Australia also, in New Zealand also. Despite that, the Australian courts are saying that penalty cannot be a service or whatever. Because when I'm breaking the law, I'm breaking the lawyers, ethics, etc. I am not giving any service to the professional community or to the bar council, for which it can be, or when they are rusticating me, they are not giving me any service. Similar case was this judgment is, I don't have this, case 6, case S65. Case S65, 1996, 17 New Zealand tax cases, page 7408. In this case, finally they said that services has to be something which benefits the recipient. It can't be anything which works against the recipient. And the same line is followed by the UK VAT Tribunal also in Northamptonshire Football Association, where penalty was charged on certain football players, etc. The citation is 1996 British VAT cases, page 2128. Then in another New Zealand tribunal case, which is case 2T22, there was an accidental fire which was lit and damages were claimed by the other side. And again the tribunal asked whether he is supplying a service by destroying someone's property. The revenue argued that this damages which were given is consideration for the service, and the court asked whether when he lit the fire and he destroyed his neighbor's property, he rendered any service or not. So the ordinary meaning of the word service is still there. Again, I will emphasize, we have copied, I won't use any other word, we have copied this service includes, means anything other than goods from European Union, New Zealand, Australia. Canada also uses, I think, somewhat similar phraseology. And in that sense, I don't think, therefore, that the government or parliament in India intended to give it some other meaning. Otherwise, also, if you give it an expansive meaning, trying to bring liquidated damages and penalties, everything into services, then it becomes quite absurd. Then again, in the definition of services, if you are using money, or if money itself is outside the definition of services, but use of money or conversion of money, etc., for consideration is a service. The best example is in UK. Again, this case was there. There was a person who was transporting cash from bank to the ATM of the ATM of the bank. Okay, he started saying that this is not a supply, because this is a transaction in money, that I am supplying money. And the UK court said this is not supply of money, you are merely giving transportation services relating to money. Those transportation services relating to money can be charged. Okay, similarly services relating to the use of money is when you are making a loan, etc. When you are giving a loan, then you are allowing the other party to use the money, and the consideration for it is your interest. All those transactions will be covered. Okay. Now we'll see section 71A. The further requirement is that a supply of goods or services has to be in the course or furtherance of business. So what do you mean by course or furtherance of business? Now, business is defined in section 2, subsection 17. 1 minute. Business is defined in, again, a lot of people keep saying कि ये business का definition इतना बड़ा है कि everything can be taxed in this. That is not so. In fact, the law is, as Chief Justice Chagla, he in this Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation Development Authority case in sales tax, he said the revenue argued that the definition of supply is so wide that everything falls in it. Then he asked that if the definition of supply you are saying, definition of business in sales tax, you had these terms, sale could be only taxed if the seller was carrying on business, etc. Then he asked, why would you say that only a sale in the course of business is to be taxed if you in fact wanted to tax everything? You may have just said tax all sales. The fact that you qualified the taxing act by putting a business requirement means some limitation was intended by the legislature. Now, if the business requirement is intended as a limitation, that means the definition of business is to be construed in a limited and strict manner. It cannot cover everything. Otherwise, as he said, if everything was to be covered, then you might have as well taxed everything and said all supplies are taxable. Now, kindly see subclause A says any trade, commerce, manufacture, etc., whether or not for a pecuniary benefit. Now, in sales tax, the initial law was that
Ishan,
yes,
Ishan,
sir.
just if you can take up the concepts a little faster so that we can take up the question and
Yes,
answer.
I will just start practical discussion. I am ending this. Schedule 1 and 2, I'll just quickly.
Yeah.
In sales tax, the question was if there is no profit motive, there cannot be any tax. They said if there is no profit motive, there cannot be any business. Then the question arose, they amended the act, Sales Tax Act, and they said that even if there is no profit motive, this can be business. Subsequently, then that Shirdi Sai Baba case went to the Supreme Court, that Sai Publication Fund, where the Supreme Court said even if profit motive is made irrelevant, ultimately it is required, the word business has some commercial connotation, and if the activity is religious activity, education, etc., then that is not a commercial activity, that cannot be a business at all. And that Sai Publication Fund therefore continues to be good law even in GST. Kindly see the entire definition of business in GST is borrowed from your Sales Tax Act, except for some changes, and therefore the judgments which were there in sales tax are all relevant. Now we'll just quickly go to Schedule 1, because the rest of the, again, one point is 7(1)(a) also says supply has to be for consideration. That also is copied from outside India, and the law which has developed is this: supply for consideration means there has to be some contractual bargain. There has to be a bargain. If I am giving you a supply, you give me consideration. If I am getting money, whether or not I give a supply, then there is no bargain. There cannot be a supply for consideration in such a case. Then we'll quickly go to Schedule 1. So Schedule 1 to Schedule 1, as you know, are those cases where even without your consideration, there is it is treated as a supply. Activities to be treated as a supply even without consideration. Now, I will not deal at length with this. All of you must be knowing. One of the issues which is involved in this is they are saying supply between agent and principal is to be treated as a supply. According to me, between an agent and principal, there is no supply at all. It does not, when a principal is sending goods to his agent, he is not supplying goods as per ordinary meaning. And therefore, when this Schedule 1 includes a transaction between supply and agent, that transaction actually cannot be made a supply by way of a deeming fiction. So that is one of the issues which arises in this. Then Schedule 2 are those transactions. Earlier, the controversy was that if something is not supply, as per section 7 but is specified in schedule 2, then whether that becomes a supply. And then certain advance ruling said liquidated damages etc. are also supply. Thereafter, Parliament amended the Act, Section 7 itself, to say that if a particular transaction does not cross the threshold of supply at all, then it cannot fall within Schedule 2 also. It has to first qualify as a supply under Section 7, then only it will become a supply, or then only it will fall within Schedule 2. Schedule 2 is nothing but a classification provision. Whether something is a supply or whether something is not, whether something is goods or whether something is not a goods is the only thing which Schedule 2 does. Schedule 2 is not supposed to be interpreted as adding, altering, extending or modifying section 7 at all. Having said that, just see section schedule 2 4C. In schedule 2 4C it says that when I am voluntarily deregistering or when I die etc., subject to certain exceptions, when the business is closing on my death or when I voluntarily deregister etc., it will be deemed to be a supply of goods. Now according to me, after the amendment in 2019 of the section 7, which says that schedule 2 is subject to section 7 and something which is not a supply as per section 7 cannot be a supply as per, cannot fall within schedule 2. According to me, this 4C is therefore repealed by implication, because 4C is trying to enact a fiction. Whatever 4C is saying is not a supply as per the ordinary meaning of the act. And therefore, to that extent, 4C, according to me, after the amendment of section 7, has been repealed by implication. Then we'll see schedule 3. Schedule 3 are of course those cases which are not supply at all. They say not supply of goods or services, which means they are not treated as a supply at all, because your charge itself is not on supply of goods or services. One of the clauses is actionable claims other than betting, lottery and gambling. Therefore, when your definition of goods says includes actionable claims, it has to be read with schedule 3. It will mean only betting, lottery and gambling, which will be covered by the GST Act. All other actionable claims are outside the definition of, outside the scope of the levy itself. Now this is, and the topic is quite vast. We'll go to practical discussion now because we are already at almost 1:15. We'll take up various questions. Any questions, Pitam?
Yeah, Ishan, it was very well indeed explained by you. As you are the author of your book, Concept of Supply, which has been published by Bombay CA Society, so we just request you to give your thoughts on whether the term supplies in Constitution is a positive act or a negative act also. Can liquidation damages be taxable under the Constitution or under GST laws or not? You have given a broad discussion over the same, but we want in a gist whether how it can be taxable under GST and how it flows from the Constitution.
No, see, Constitution is restricted to the ordinary meaning. What is the ordinary meaning of supply and services? Both supply as well as service require something to be done for the benefit of the recipient. Now, when you are imposing penalty, etc., are you really benefiting the recipient? In fact, you are doing him a disservice. तुमको अगर उसको benefit करना था, तो you should not have imposed a penalty at all. Now I understand in schedule 2 they have put these words tolerating an act, etc., etc. Now that has to be seen whether, you know, ultimately by just putting a fiction saying this is a tolerating an act, if it's going beyond the ordinary meaning, what is a tolerating an act which falls within the ordinary meaning? That may be, for example, there is some nuisance which is happening. Okay, you have a right to go to a court of law and to get redress or to file a complaint, etc. Instead of doing that, you take some money from that other fellow and you keep quiet. That can be tolerating for consideration. That is a different matter. But generally, if you know your liquidated damages when he is imposing on you, in liquidated damages specifically, with this question arises when there is a delay in performance of contract, etc. Now, when you are performing a contract, kindly understand under the specific relief act, the case law which is there, which says if there are liquidated damages for delay which are paid, that in fact is an indication that time is not an essence of the contract, that time is not essential factor. If time itself is, or performance within the time limit is not an essential factor, then how can you say that he has excused you by only taking liquidated damages? Then there are judgments which say that even after payment of liquidated damages, they can put you on a new time limit. Then where is the question of him giving up any right? If today, if I am delaying the performance of the contract, I am paying some liquidated damages to the other fellow. Even after paying those liquidated damages, if that other fellow can impose a new timeline, then what right has he given up? He has not given up any right. He has not surrendered any right. Therefore, according to me, without getting into this complicated discussion, even on the ordinary meaning, anything which is not beneficial to the recipient cannot fall within the definition of supply. Now, this question has not on a constitutional level, but there is a judgment in Australia, Westley nominees, this is 152 Federal Court Reporter 461. They also have that tolerating an act, forbearance, etc. Where the Australian court says that in fact this tolerating an act, etc., which is put, has extended the ordinary meaning of supply. It has gone beyond the ordinary meaning. Then the further question, they did not decide whether according to the constitution they could have done that. The reason is the constitution is a bit different. It is, the words used are excise duty, etc. They don't use the word supply, etc. in their constitution. So that is a bit different, but you can rely on this judgment to say that the schedule 2, when it says tolerating an act, etc., that goes beyond an ordinary meaning. That is not really a supply as per the constitution. Okay, next question.
Thank you, Ishan. Now, as you explained us about the actionable claim is included in the definition of the goods. So whether giving of the corporate guarantees is a transaction in relation to actionable claims and is not treated as supplies as per Schedule 3, or you have a thoughts otherwise over it?
With respect to corporate guarantees and all, there are judgments outside India saying that there are some equitable, what you call actionable claim here is known as chosen action outside India. There are some judgments which say that it amount in Canada, etc., it amounts to a chosen action. But really, at least in India, there is no such judgment. And according to me, it can't be an actionable claim. It is something which will have to be studied more. I will only give a prima facie view as of now. It will have to be studied more, but I can't see prima facie that it can fall in actionable claim and therefore you can escape GST. Okay, next.
Okay, so now coming, this question is basically of the interest of many chartered accountants, as legally whether the transfer of interest in the partnership can be treated as supply or not.
There is a European Court of Justice judgment in that Cap Hag, which I think in my book I've written the. Okay, it is. I'll just look up the citation and give you. Cap Hag, they said that when you are admitting a person into partnership, then you are not making any supply. It's not business. They call what we call business. They call it taxable activity. They said this is something in the nature of a capital account transaction. It is not economic activity in the nature of a trading activity. But as far as India is concerned, in India there is a Madras High Court judgment following some English case in that SMM Chettiar, I think 97 income tax reporter. There they are saying that partner has an partner who is admitted into partnership gets an actionable claim to sue for the profits, etc. So you can rely on that judgment and say that since this is an actionable claim, this is not taxable at all. SMM Subramaniam Chettiar or something. Okay, next. Hello. हो गया क्या? Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
So I'll take another question. E-commerce operator Ola gave invoice in the name of the cab owner who is not registered and charge GST on behalf of unregistered cab owner. So is it right, sir? Can he do it?
Who is this? This is not on concept of supply. E-commerce पे है क्या?
हाँ जी, हाँ जी.
So just repeat the question.
Sir, e-commerce operator
Hmm.
Ola give invoice in the name of cab owner who is registered and charge GST on behalf of unregistered cab owner. So is it right, sir? Can they do?
I will just like to. Ishan, if you can take this query.
Ola, prima facie, my view is that Ola is an aggregator. No, it falls within that this one, section 51, section 52. That is my prima facie view.
Hello, Pitam ji.
Yes, Peter.
The voice is not audible. There is some internet connection. Yeah, Shubham, now it is okay. Tell me, Shubham.
Yeah.
So there was one question regarding one participant, which is telling that suppose A sells a land to B and B develops the land and sell it further. So A, when sells a land to B, is not treated as a supply as this is specifically being covered under Schedule 3. And whereas when B develops that land and when they sell it to the subsequent person as a residential unit, this will be treated as supply, and this is a supply of service as mentioned under Schedule 2.
Okay.
And so coming back to one more question, Ishan, what are your thoughts over the dividend? Whether the dividend is a supply or not?
So what about land? Land का कुछ नहीं है, question नहीं है. I thought it was a question.
No, there was a question from a participant, so I just clarified it further.
Okay, so you clarified it. With respect to dividend, yes. Yes, dividend. See, dividend, which is again, there is a Floridian judgment of the European Court of Justice, which is directly applicable. They say that dividend is not consideration for you buying shares, etc. That is because they have discussed a lot of things. The simplest reason that they have given is this: dividend may or may not be given every year. There may be some years there is no dividend at all. Me buying any shares, by simply buying shares and contributing capital to the company, does not entitle me to dividend every year. Correct? It may or may not be given, and therefore on that basis they have said this is not a supply for consideration. But there may be some dividends like that preference share dividends, etc., which are actually you have to give it as a matter of this one, that the board is bound to give you that dividend every year on that share. In such case also, according to me, it's a capital account transaction. I can't see how by simply contributing capital to the company, I am purchasing the right to dividend or anything. That is my view.
Thank you, Ishan. So let's take some question and answer from the participants. So one of the question is whether the car repair or bus body building is a supply of goods or supply of service.
Car repair, when the other fellow is giving you everything, his car is coming to you, you are only doing some work on it. That is covered by the Schedule 2 Clause 3. No treatment or process on another person's goods is a supply of services. Repairs will fall in that. That person is not supplying the car to you. He is giving you his car. You are simply doing some services on the car.
So one more question: whether return back of old credit balance is supply or not. Suppose there are some creditors which I need to pay and I write it back to my income, whether these will tend amount to the supply or not.
Can you repeat?
Whether the writing back of the old sundry creditors amount in my income side will tend amount to supply or not.
What is the supply you've done in such a case? So where is the consideration? अरे वो दे नहीं रहा है इसलिए तो मैं राइट ऑफ कर रहा हूँ. वो दे देगा तो I will be more than happy.
No. I needed to pay to some of the parties or my creditors. Suppose I need to pay 100 rupees to my creditors, and I'm not paying.
My payable, sorry, I thought it was receivable. No, yes. My payable, which I am writing off in my books, or he is writing off in his books.
Yes. So my payable, when I write in my books,
where is the reciprocal transaction in this? Where is the
The
consideration
reciprocal.
for writing off? There has to be supply, there has to be consideration. If you are saying writing off is a supply, where is the consideration for it? According to me, it is not. There have to be two things which are reciprocal in nature. Only then there will be a supply for consideration. That is my view.
Right, sir.
One more query should be taken. There is one more query.
Yeah, no,
When
yeah, except people are there.
when car is bought in company's account and some of the basically the car is used for the director's business purpose as well as the personal purpose. So what is the solution to it in respect of the GST on car purchase, repair and maintenance? It is debarred under section 17(5), so I don't see any right over the same. In case I say a simple example, Ishan, that there is an input
But
which relates to
with respect to car, input tax credit is different. But there is a judgment by Bombay High Court saying that if the car is subsequently sold, that Hansraj Brothers or something in sales tax, if car is subsequently sold, then that transaction cannot be said to be incidental or ancillary to the main business of the company, and it cannot be taxed. In Madhya Pradesh, but I should tell you, there is a ulta judgment saying that it is incidental and ancillary. So those who are in Bombay are following that old Hansraj wala judgment for the past many years. And even today people are following that in GST. If the car is sold.
now. There is one more question, whether this is the last question, I think so. Suppose there is one question which states that the amount paid to MCA, Ministry of Company Affairs, ROC, will amount to a supply and whether RCM would be applicable. So in my point of view, payment to made to MCA defines, it is specifically category that this payment is made to the government, and all the payments made to the government authorities, local bodies, or a PSU in which government has a stake of more than 90% comes under RCM charge, and we need to make the payment under RCM charge. Now the question is whether there is any exemption over the same or not. So there is an exemption of an amount up to rupees 5,000. In case the payment made to ROC is less than 5,000, there is an exemption. In case the payment is more than 5,000, then we have to make the payment under RCM mechanism.